With one game left to go in the regular season, I wanted to give some Seahawks predictions for the offseason. Let me know what you think of my predictions. Post your own in the comments section. Let's run through what we expect to happen starting next week. So I think once the season is finished, now that the Seahawks are not going to be in the playoffs, things are going to move very quickly. Let's start with the GM, John Schneider. I think he's safe for this year. I don't think there's any danger of him losing his job a year after appointing Mike McDonald to a huge contract. However, I think there will be some pressure from ownership to put certain things right. First of all, I think there'll be pressure on him to make sure that the Seahawks are a playoff team next year. I think there's going to be pressure on him to make adjustments to the staff, which he's now in charge of, to make sure that they're better placed to have a more successful 2025. I think there's going to be a ton of pressure on him to dramatically improve the offensive line. And I think ownership will say to him, you have to start getting a move on here to find a more long-term, exciting future at quarterback. So I think John Schneider is going to be safe. I don't think he's going to get fired. I do think, however, that ownership will say to him, we expect this, 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 and this, and you have got to deliver. And if we're sat here in a year's time still talking about a future at quarterback, which is sort of year to year, a bad offensive line, not making the playoffs, needing to change coordinators again, then I think he could be on the hot seat then. But for this year, I expect John Schneider to be safe and to come back. One person I don't expect to be back is Ryan Grubb. We've talked a lot about this over the last few weeks. I think it's almost certain there's going to be a mutual parting of ways. It simply hasn't worked this year. They took a shot on a highly rated college coordinator who worked very closely with Kalen DeBoer. He'd done some great things at Washington. It simply hasn't worked out. It's been too much of a learning curve for Grubb to just come into the NFL having never coached in the league before and to run an offense. And Mike McDonald, I think, wants somebody to essentially be the head coach of the offense so that he can focus on the defense. A lot of head coaches work that way. And I'm afraid that Grubb it just hasn't worked out. So I think the writing's on the wall there. A lot of people are talking about this now. A lot of people are talking about this almost as if it's inevitable that Grubb is going to go. And I think it is. So I think very early next week, we will learn that Ryan Grubb has gone. So who replaces him? This is going to be a huge appointment. You can't change coordinator every single year. And we've seen that one of the biggest downfalls for defensive-minded head coaches over the last few years is getting the offensive coordinator wrong or getting it right and then losing them after a year or two and then struggling to replace them. The best example of that was Dan Quinn, who had a lot of success in Atlanta with Kyle Shanahan. And then when Shanahan had left, couldn't find somebody to pass the baton on to, and his career in Atlanta fell apart after that. So they've got to get this right. I think that Jake Peetz will be the next Seahawks offensive coordinator. I think that they will want some continuity. I don't think they're going to want to bring somebody in completely different who's going to want to set up a whole new offense with a completely different terminology, completely different philosophy. I don't think they're going to want to do that. I think they will promote Jake Peetz. I don't think they can afford to do a long search. Yes, it would be nice to consider the Josh McCowans or some of the staff that are some of these teams, maybe some of the Chargers, for example. But I don't think you can afford to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month for these teams to get eliminated from the playoffs and just sort of park your search. That was part of the problem they had last year with waiting for Mike McDonald, is that by the time they'd appointed him, a lot of coordinators, positional coaches already been appointed to other jobs and they were behind the eight ball. I think they've got to get a move on here. So I don't think they're going to have a big, long search, which includes people who are in the playoffs. I think they will promote Jake Peetz. They may speak to one or two other candidates, but I think it will be Peetz. There's been enough. So when you listen to Mike McDonald, it's been quite, I think it has anyway, been quite easy to pass that he's not been entirely satisfied with Grubb, that maybe their philosophies are not aligned, that they are not sort of on the same page. But at the same time, McDonald has name dropped Jake Peetz. I think it's very clear that there's a mutual respect between McVay and McDonald, and Peetz is a McVay protege. Peetz was incredibly highly rated. And this is the thing. I think people will look at this and go, is it another Shane Waldron? Is this really an exciting hire? But I think what you've got to remember is, like, a year ago, Pete's was one of the hot names, who was someone who might get a chance to be an offensive coordinator. And I thought it was a real surprise that the Seahawks were able to lure him to Seattle to be the passing game coordinator, perhaps with a bit more responsibility and a higher salary. And I think that if he'd have been appointed a year ago, people would have gone, great, give it a go. So I don't actually feel it's a problem at all to give him a chance. And if you actually look at the people who have coached with McVay, Matt LaFleur, obviously Kevin O'Connell, Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay, they've all been successful. The only person who hasn't been successful is Shane Waldron. But I don't think that's a reason to fear going after another McVay guy. And I'm down for it. I genuinely think it would be an appointment to create intrigue and should be sort of thought as a positive move. I know that he's been there, and you could say, well, doesn't he bear some responsibility for the offense? But how much influence does he actually have? I don't know. And I think the other thing is that I think McDonald probably wants someone who is a bit like him, who is methodical, who is technical, maybe has a similar kind of personality, and will feel like he and Pete can create a good vision together, like a complementary defense and offense, and can work quite closely. And I quite like the idea of that, I have to say. And yes, in an ideal world, you could argue maybe the best thing for McDonald would be to have his version of Wade Phillips when McVay got the job in LA and won Coach of the Year in his rookie season, by the way. It really benefited having an older head, an ex-head coach running his defense for him. I'm just not sure who that could be. If Doug Peterson gets fired from the Jaguars, I'm not sure he's going to want to rush back into the league to be an offensive coordinator. Brian Daboll was a fantastic offensive coordinator for the Bills, but one, is he even going to get fired? He did get a vote of confidence, as did the GM a few weeks ago. And there was a lot of reports out of New York a year ago talking about quite a toxic atmosphere around the Giants. So I'm not sure that bringing him in is necessarily the kind of move that McDonald and the Seahawks want to do. So I think it's going to be Jake Peetz, who's the next defensive coordinator, and I think Ryan Grubb is going to part and probably go and join Kalen DeBoer in Alabama. And boy, does Alabama need a lot of work. So that's probably where he will head next. Next topic, next prediction, Geno Smith. My prediction is that they will agree a short-term extension with Geno Smith, which lowers his cap hit and retains a year-to-year basis for this. I don't think they're in the mood to risk things on an unknown reclamation project. I don't think they're there. I think if Schneider is essentially being told that he's GMing for faith in his job, then going with Zach Wilson or even a Daniel Jones, that could be a death knell for his position. I think it's just probably going to be seen as too much of a risk. And, Baker Mayfield was as a former first overall pick. Sam Darnold was third overall pick. Darnold had great physical tools. Zach Wilson, I don't think has shown he's got the mentality to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And Daniel Jones, I just think he's flattered to deceive for a long time. Even in the year when he got the Giants to the playoffs and they won a playoff game, his numbers were not amazing. It's really surprising that the Giants did what they did and gave him a huge contract and chose not to pay Saquon Barkley instead. It's a massive, weird decision from them. So I just think they will see there's just too much of a risk that it could go badly if they do that. So I think they're going to look at this and probably think, even if it's just for the sake of having somebody in the building that they know what he can do, they will extend Geno Smith. I don't think it's going to be an expensive contract. That they will be able to lower his cap hit from the likely $44.5 million it's going to be if he hits his escalators this weekend. And I'm not saying for a second that he's guaranteed to be the starter next year. They paid Matt Flynn in 2012 and he never started a game for them. So, is it possible that he gets Wally pipped a little bit? Maybe. If someone overachieves in preseason and nicks the job off him, I don't think it'd be a contract which nails him down to be the starter for the next 3 years or anything. I think it will just be, okay, here's what the Seahawks have. Let's not lose what we've got, and then let's see if we can improve on it during the season. I think that's what they're going to do. Now, a lot of people are not going to like that, but that's just my prediction. That's what I think they're going to do. What I will say, though, is I find it quite frustrating that people within Seattle media and Seahawks Twitter keep saying that you can't possibly improve upon Geno Smith. There's no options. There's nothing. Because I just think that's such a lazy take. And there is part of me that thinks maybe this has run its course, that maybe they've reached the ceiling with Geno Smith, and that actually just carrying on year after year with Smith as the starter is just sort of, you're never going to sort of take the step to be really, really good, but you're also never going to take the step back to be bad enough to get into position to get a good young rookie quarterback. And that's a difficult place to be. But when people say you can't possibly get any better than Geno Smith, here's the statistics. I've written them down here. He's 19th for touchdowns, 21st for QBR, 18th for quarterback rating, 26th for quarterback rating under pressure. He's 5th in the league for turnover-worthy plays. He's 2nd in the league for interceptions. People keep going on about the offensive line, but his time to throw, which is 2.83 seconds, is only the 14th. It's 14th in the NFL. It's middle of the pack, so it's not that bad. And as I wrote recently in an article, he had a real hot streak in 2022, which kind of ended at the Munich game against Tampa Bay. Since that game, he has thrown 52 touchdowns and 32 interceptions. If you want to make that a ratio that's a bit easier to understand, that's a 13 touchdown to 8 interception ratio. That's not very good. And since that Munich game, the Seahawks are 20-19 with Smith under center. Again, that's bang average. So for the people saying you can't possibly replace Geno Smith, I'm not having that. I think you can replicate or even better those numbers. The reason that I think they're going to carry on with Smith, at least to have him on the roster, is because I think it's about the risk. And I'm not sure blowing it up at the quarterback position and going with an unknown is likely. What I think is much more likely is that they keep Smith, lower the cap hit, then maybe add, a younger Zach Wilson, maybe a Daniel Jones. Maybe they make a deal for somebody else. They know what they did with Sam Howell, Malik Willis, or somebody like that. They go and bring somebody in to add competition. And maybe at training camp, it's more of an open competition than simply Geno Smith's the guy, like it was last year with Sam Howell. That I can see. But the idea of just getting rid of Smith and then going into the unknown and hoping that somebody can work out, I just don't think this GM and this head coach, who's still very inexperienced, still trying to work things out, I just don't think that's where they're at. And it is a shame that they haven't been able to draft somebody. And that's, again, I don't hold the franchise responsible for that, because I don't think they've whiffed on anybody in the draft that I would have wanted them, with hindsight, to take. So I don't think there's much fault to pin at the GM and the team for that. But it is a shame that they don't have somebody waiting in the wings, because if they did, they'd be taking over this year. But it is just what it is. So that's what I think. I think the exception to this would be if the Vikings allow Sam Darnold to reach free agency. If that happens, I think all bets are off. I think they would go after him. I think that, it's easily forgotten that John Schneider was at Sam Darnold's pro day, just as he was at Josh Allen's pro day. He wasn't at Baker Mayfield. He wasn't at Josh Rosen's. I didn't seem to have much interest in Lamar Jackson. And but he did go to Darnold's, and he did go to Allen's. So I do think that there was some interest there. I think you have probably not heard as much about that since, because Darnold's flopped until he's gone to somewhere that isn't the Jets and the Panthers, and now he's had massive success and is starting to show what people thought he was going to be when he was drafted 3rd overall from USC. So I think if he makes it to the open market, I think the Seahawks will be bidders, and they will go after it, perhaps aggressively, and perhaps with the thought of making it happen. I just think it's increasingly difficult to see how the Vikings let him go. He's won 14 games. He might win 15 this weekend and lead them to the number 1 seed in the NFC. I don't know how you can let him go, even if you bomb in the playoffs after that. I think if nothing else, you tag him and have him for another year. There's no. I'm not for a second suggesting the Vikings have given up on JJ McCarthy, but he is a rookie quarterback who's going to be cheap for the next 4 years, coming off a serious knee injury that's required 2 surgeries. Like the idea that they're just going to, we'll just move on to JJ McCarthy. I mean, like, I think another year's grace at least is important. So if you tag Darnold, you buy that. If you do a Baker Mayfield style contract with an out in a couple of years, again, that you're not writing off McCarthy. You can have both of them on the roster, and McCarthy will just become their version of Jordan Love. So I think it's very unlikely that the Vikings will allow Sam Darnold to leave Minnesota, whatever happens in the playoffs. If he did, though, I could see them going after him. And even if they tagged him with an idea to trading him, again, I could see the Seahawks being quite interested in that. If they do continue with Smith as a bridge, which is what I'm predicting, I would expect them to add another quarterback, whether that is, like I said, a reclamation project or whether it's a rookie drafted. And I think that's where it gets interesting. There's been talk, Dame Brugler was tweeting out over the weekend. I keep saying it's the weekend. I could keep doing this on the radio as well. It's not the weekend, is it? It just feels like the weekend because it's like New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and stuff like that. There was talk over the last 48 hours that Drew Aller may still declare for the draft, even though he said he's going back to Penn State. If he reneges on his decision to stay at Penn State and actually does declare, watch out. He's got the exact same measurables as Josh Allen. He's not as athletic as Josh Allen, but he is athletic. He doesn't have the arm of Josh Allen, but he has got a big arm. And the improvement he's made, like he was undraftable last season. And you could see at the start of the season that he'd taken a step, but not enough for me to be a first or second round pick. And now that we're at the end of the season, he's taken another step. And now he is looking like a player that you could justify taking in that range. So I think if he does turn pro, just keep an eye on him because, well, one, I could see that a team like the Giants picking in the top 5 taking him, especially if they keep Daboll, who did such a good job with Josh Allen. But if he lasts to, say, pick 7 or 8 where Josh Allen went, I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks traded up and went after him. I really wouldn't. Being aggressive to go and get a quarterback, I would not be surprised at all if they did that. So I think Drew Aller's a name to keep an eye on. If it's not him, if he doesn't turn pro, if he just goes too early, if they can't trade up, then I do think they would still potentially draft someone, either day 2 or on day 3, to add somebody in there. But I do think whatever happens, I think Geno Smith will be on the roster unless he isn't cooperative to agree a compromise contract, which would be foolish in my opinion, because I don't think he's got a market. I don't think he's got a big market. I don't think if he is suddenly a free agent, there's going to be teams banging down. There'll be teams who be prepared to sign him, but not in the kind of contract that it'd be worth ruining things in Seattle and moving on for. His best move is to agree a deal in Seattle, embrace that he is a year-to-year bridge. He is not going to get a long-term massive commitment, not after a 17 touchdown, 15 interception season with a game to go against the Rams backups. That's just not going to happen. So I think if he's smart, if his people are smart, then they'll do a compromise deal. I just hope the Seahawks don't bid against themselves on that. Offensive line prediction. I would expect the Seahawks to attack this area. And I know that in the past they haven't done that, but I think the pressure's on John Schneider now, and he will do it. I think they will make at least one key veteran signing. It could be someone like Ryan Kelly to play center. If Trey Smith somehow reaches free agency, he would be highly coveted by a number of teams. If that happens, I think the Seahawks should go after that. But I think one way or another, whether that's via trading for somebody or via a signing, they will add at least one veteran of some reputation to play in the interior. So then you would have Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, experienced interior offensive lineman, and that would be a good start to the offseason in terms of reshaping your offensive roster. I think they'd have to look in the draft. It is a good class for interior offensive linemen. They don't have to take a guard or a center with their first pick, but I do suspect that they would draft for that position with one of their first 2 selections. I think that's absolutely inevitable. I think they've got to find somebody who can start quickly. They can't have another Christian Haynes who comes in and then he's not even the backup anymore. That they're letting LeMayer take his rookie lumps instead of Christian Haynes is a disaster of a third-round pick. They need somebody who, this guy's going to come in, he's going to start, he's going to play a certain level, even as a rookie, and you've got to go and get him in. That's why I think Tyler Booker's a big option for them, because Tyler Booker's ceiling, he's not going to be Quentin Nelson, but he's going to play, for me, pretty well as a rookie. I think he's ready for the NFL. I think he already plays like an NFL offensive lineman, and he's young. He's like 21, so I think he's going to get better if you can work with him. And I think he's got massive potential in the running game. He's got huge size. Like reportedly, they liked J.C. Latham a year ago. I don't think that was to play him at tackle because they were expecting Lucas to come back, and he has. He might have started at tackle initially, but then he would have moved inside. They signed George Fant, though. So I think if they were going to draft J.C. Latham, that would probably with the idea of moving him inside to guard, where I think he would be elite. I think he's a much better guard than a tackle. I have no idea what the Titans are doing playing him at left tackle. The Titans have essentially drafted two people who are not suited to play left tackle to play him at left tackle in back-to-back drafts. So I think they were looking for a massive, athletic guard. And that is what Tyler Booker is. And you can plug him in day one at left guard, and that's an upgrade over Laken Tomlinson. And you're putting down some roots on this offensive line. So that's why I think he's such a strong, likely option for the Seahawks. He can start in day one, but he's not the only one. Does Kelvin Banks last into range? Donovan Jackson is a very impressive interior offensive lineman who's had to go and play left tackle for Ohio State because of the injury to Josh Simmons, and he's not done a bad job. I thought he returned to form when he was playing at left guard prior to that injury for Simmons. You know, in round two, Dylan Fairchild's a good option to come in and be able to start quickly. I think he's got to get a little bit stronger, which is a worry, obviously, with Christian Haynes. But he's like a big-time wrestling background guy. You know, he's somebody that would appeal to them, I imagine. He's got good size, and I think he could do a job for them there. You know, Will Campbell is going to have to move inside to guard. People go, he's a top 10 pick. He's a top 10 pick. He's tackle. He's got 32-inch arms. He's going to have to move inside. Is he aggressive enough for them? He's got good size. He's athletic. I think he could last into range for Seattle. Do they want to take him instead as a guard convert? Maybe they do. And then there's a whole bunch of players on kind of like, I need to see them test. I need to see them at the Senior Bowl. You know, the Wyatt Millums, you know, people like Armand Membu, Marcus Mbow, Emery Jones, you know, people like Jack Nelson. You know, let's see how they test. Let's see how they perform at the Senior Bowl to see whether, you know, you want to consider those kind of guys as tackle to guard converts as well. But the point is that they have options. So at least one high pick on the offensive line. And frankly, I couldn't care less if it was two. You know, do you go and get a couple of guards? Do you go and get a guard and Jake Majors? I don't care if they do that. I think you have to commit to the trenches. We have talked so much about committing to the offensive line and resource to the offensive line. To not do that now would feel pretty dumb, if you ask me. Now, I accept that when you're in the first round of a draft, you know, sometimes you don't want to force yourself into drafting for need. And, you know, I think the Seahawks are picking in a bit of a strange spot. Like they are just on the outside because they're probably going to pick 18th. They can't pick lower than 18th because they're not going to qualify for the playoffs. So that's the latest they could pick. And I think they can only move up one spot. And even then, I don't think it's very likely. So probably going to pick 18th. That to me is going to just be outside where some of the non-offensive linemen who are attractive are going to get picked. So by that, I mean Jalen Walker is going to be off the board probably. Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren, the two tight ends, are probably going to be off the board. Malachi Starks is probably going to be off the board. James Pierce is probably going to be off the board. There's a chance Jihad Campbell, the linebacker, could be off the board. So, you know, when you get to 18, you then sort of think, okay, are you going to go for a guard? And there will be good options there. Do you trade down? If you think there's like 4 or 5 with the same kind of grade, you could trade down first and do that. That's an option. Or do you take a chance on that? Harold Fannin Jr. is really underrated. I think because he plays for Bowling Green. The guy's a phenomena. And I think he's somebody who could easily go in that kind of range. Whether the Seahawks want to take a athletic pass-catching tight end 18th overall, I don't know. If you're trying to build an identity that is similar to the Harbaughs, and I think they should. I should be completely comfortable forcing a pick on the offensive line. That's what Harbaugh did a year ago. And because Malik Nabers was a better player, but they took a left tackle to play right tackle instead. I think you should be forcing an offensive line pick here because that's where you've got to pump your resources into. But if they wanted to take a chance on one of the pass rushers, a Mike Green, a Shamar Stewart, people like that, a Michael Williams, a TJ Sanders, another defensive tackle, maybe. It's not the end of the world. A Nick Amanwari, who is unbelievable. Could be a Kyle Hamilton type. He's much more athletic than Kyle Hamilton is. You've got other positions that you could consider there. Jihad Campbell, if he lasts, is built like an absolute bloody tank. I just think, we talk so much about the offensive line. Can you really ignore that now? So I think, at least one high draft pick, at least one big-time veteran addition, and then maybe with the other position, you say, okay, we have still got Anthony Bradford under cheap contract, still got Christian Haynes, still got LeMayer. Bring in maybe a cheaper veteran to compete with those guys. And is that going to set the world on fire? Are you going to have the best defensive line in the NFL? Are you? Think of a word. Use your imagination. You're not. But the problem is that teams like Philadelphia, who have great offensive lines, build them over years. They hit on draft picks who are great. And, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, two blog favorites, it had successful draft picks written all over them. And the Seahawks have got to get into the habit. Who are the successful draft picks on the offensive line? Go and identify them. Go and get them. I've just remembered, I've not mentioned Gray Zabel as a player that I really like. He's another one at North Dakota State. Identify who are the linemen who are most likely to have success. I don't think it's as hard as the Seahawks have made it seem over the years. And keep drafting these guys. Keep building your lines. You have to do that. They're too expensive now. You've got to draft and invest. And quite frankly, if they signed 3 veteran offensive linemen and drafted 2 and sat the 2 rookies and said, we're going to develop them over time and not rush them and do what Philadelphia does, I'd be totally fine with that. But they've got to change their approach to the offensive line. They've got to change a little bit, I think, tweak a little bit about the way they're analyzing these players because it hasn't been a big success so far. And they've got to hit on a couple of players, sign in and a draft pick at least. DK Metcalf, what is going to happen with him? My prediction is that they will extend DK Metcalf. And there will be a fair few people who won't like that, but I think they will, and it will significantly lower his cap hit to save some money in 2025, and I think they will commit to DK. I think a lot of people have caught up maybe a bit too much on the numbers of the Jeffersons and people like that who have got paid an absolute fortune. I don't think DK Metcalf can ask for a contract in that kind of range after the season he's just had. I think it's going to be sort of the level below. I think he might have to compromise to accept that because even if you traded him, is another team going to pay him $32 million a year? I don't think they are. So it might end up being more like 25, 27 maybe, 27-ish. That he gets a deal done here. Maybe they do it short term again to give him another opportunity in a year or two. Maybe more, have to be more than a year, but like in a couple of years, 3 years to again hit the market, maybe. I don't know. But I think even if he was on 27 a year, that's still a really handsome contract. I think he wants to be in Seattle. I think Mike McDonald and John Schneider really rate DK Metcalf as a person. I mean, this is a guy who, yes, he can be frustrating at times, but he doesn't complain at all when he's not getting targets. He's not a, his ability to get baited into sort of penalties is frustrating at times, but it hasn't happened that often this year. It's really only the Bears game where it's happened. So I think that they will extend him. They will lower his cap hit. And frankly, I don't have a problem with it because I don't think you would get a great return for him. It's not an amazing draft class either. So unless you could get a first and a third for him, or even just a first or a second and a third or a second and a fourth, whatever, you do have to wonder, like, what are you getting in return? Are you getting LJ Collier and Marquise Blair? Because the last time they traded somebody in that kind of range, Frank Clark, they turned it into nothing. So I think that they will keep him. I think they will say he's one of the rare players in the league with his size and his speed. No, he's not perfect. No, he's probably never going to be an elite wide receiver. But as you maybe move on from Tyler Lockett, having Metcalf and having Jackson Smith in Jigba, who's establishing himself as the number one, might be the route that they want to go. So I think DK Metcalf will stay with the Seahawks. Other re-signings. I think they'll re-sign Jarran Reed. I think that's a no-brainer for me. I think Jarran Reed has been terrific for 2 years now. And you need him. Like, he's one of the few dogs that they've got in that locker room. He's one of the few people who, when he, you just feel like he's got that violent nature to him, on the field, in the locker room, he speaks, people listen. He's somebody who can hold people accountable. I think you need Jarran Reed. I think he's the kind of player you have to bring back next year. And I really hope they will bring him back. Ernest Jones, they have to re-sign Ernest Jones. It's probably going to cost them a lot of money because the way the defense has played since he replaced the other linebackers, and given that you gave up a fourth-round pick for the guy, they are going to have to re-sign him. So they're the main two re-signs. Cuts, I just find it really hard to imagine how you can bring back Draymond Jones. It's just not played well enough. And the money, I think you replace him with another veteran, or you draft somebody, like it could be a Jordan Birch. It could be a Ty Robinson, who's I really like watching play at Nebraska, a Darius Alexander at Toledo, Jared Ivey at Ole Miss. There are players in this draft who can do what he does. I do think there's a chance that they go, let's say, offensive line in the first round, defensive line in the second, trenches draft, which I never have a problem with. So I think there's a decent chance that they could do a Tyler Booker, Jordan Birch, or Ty Robinson double dip with the first 2 rounds. I could definitely imagine that, and I wouldn't have a problem with that personally. So I think Draymond Jones will go, and then you can probably replace him in the draft. I think a lot of people are going to expect Noah Fant to be cut. I think they will keep Noah Fant until at least after the draft. Now, if they get into a draft and Colston Loveland's there, or Tyler Warren, and they decide he's too good to pass, they're going to take him in the first round, then Noah Fant's not going to be on the roster anymore. But if they don't do that, and if they don't draft a tight end early, I don't think there's any real benefit to just getting rid of Noah Fant for the savings that, I think it's like a $9 million saving. It's not nothing, but I think for me, it's more down to, because yet again, another offensive coordinator has not done a good enough job getting the tight ends involved regularly enough. And Pharaoh Brown's not going to be back. So I think, Fant and AJ Barner might be the guys. And if you don't draft a tight end early, you keep Fant. And then if you do draft a tight end early, you just cut him after the draft. And it doesn't matter when you do it, because the cost saving is the same whether you cut him before or after June the 1st anyway. Like, you can cut him at any point this year, and he's going to cost you exactly the same amount of dead money. So there's no rush to cut him. So I think they'll play that one by ear. He may go, but that will depend what they do in the draft. And if they don't draft a tight end early, then I think he will stay. Tyler Lockett is inevitably going to be released because of the cap hit of being about $30 million. But I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that he comes back. You release him, you let him go and see the market. Then maybe, like, the thing with him is, like, if you get a chance to go and play for the Chiefs, it might be hard to turn that down. If you have a chance to go and play for the Bills, that might be hard to turn down. The Chiefs in particular, because he played at Kansas State, didn't he? So, it's a bit closer to home, and you think that might be a good fit for him. But if those options are not there, then going back to Seattle, where you've been your whole career, finishing your career in Seattle as well would be a big thing. Continuing your legacy with this franchise. And it's clear that everybody in the franchise loves Tyler Lockett. So I still think he could come back on a far cheaper contract, having been released first. So I don't think it's necessarily the end of his time in Seattle, but it will be the end of his time on this current contract. Anyway, those are my predictions for the offseason. We'll see how many of them I get right. But let me know what you think of my predictions in the comment section, and chuck in some predictions of your own in there as well. Don't forget to check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for all of the analysis. This is the busy time for us. This is when it really gets going. If you've been with us for the last 4 months, you've seen all of the scouting work we do. And this is the thing, is like, you were going to see a whole bunch of people now who suddenly decide that they're going to do some draft stuff and they're going to give some draft takes. They haven't spent the last 4 or 5 months watching 10 to 15 college football games a week, writing 4,000-word articles about draft prospects every week. We've been doing that on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. So what I would say is, if you are a Seahawks fan or just an NFL fan in general, and you want some draft takes that are coming from a position of study and research over many, many months, SeahawksDraftBlog.com is the place to be. We will have a raft of interviews like we always do with players, with personnel people, with people in the game. I will talk to people within the game to get you the best information. So SeahawksDraftBlog.com is the place to be, as is this channel. So subscribe if you haven't already. About 40% of you watch the videos and don't subscribe. Do me a massive favor, subscribe. Let's get as close to that 10,000 number as we can. Get more eyes on the videos, get the word out there. If you could like the video and also leave a comment in the comment section, it'd be much appreciated. These are my predictions. What are yours? Until next time, bye for now.